Hello, and welcome back. Tonight, we do not speak of generals, grand strategies, or the thunder of iron machines. Instead, we look at the history of the world through smaller, more innocent eyes. Imagine a world where the playground is a ruin of dust, and the gentle lullaby of a mother is replaced by the distant, haunting hum of engines in the sky. This is the story of a generation that grew up in a single night, whose toys were left behind in the rubble, and whose brightest dreams were hidden away in secret diaries. It is a tribute to the resilience of the smallest hearts that ever lived. Before we walk together through these echoes of the past, if you believe every child deserves a sky full of stars and not smoke, please like this video and subscribe. Close your eyes. Breathe in the silence. Remember the light of childhood. Fact 1. The Lonely Diaries. During the long, suffocating years of darkness, many children found their only comfort in the scratching of a pen against a scrap of paper. They wrote to a world they could no longer see, describing their smallest hopes and their deepest silent fears. A diary was never just a book, it was a secret friend, a silent witness that listened when the rest of the world chose to be silent or cruel. These words, written by the flickering light of a dying candle in hidden rooms and cold attics, became the strongest voices of our history. They remind us that even when a person is trapped behind walls, their spirit and their thoughts can fly free over any ocean. A diary was a heart placed on paper, a fragile bridge made of ink that connected a lonely child to the future they hoped to see. Fact 2. The Paper Cranes. In the very heart of the chaos, where everything seemed to be falling apart, children often found a way to create delicate beauty from absolutely nothing. They would take small scraps of paper, perhaps from an old newspaper or a discarded letter, and fold them into tiny, graceful birds. There was a legend that folding 1,000 paper cranes would bring a miracle, a wish for peace that the world so desperately needed. These tiny paper birds became silent symbols of a wish shared by millions, the simple, pure desire to wake up to a quiet sky without the sound of sirens. Each careful fold was a prayer whispered into the paper, and each crane was a message of hope sent out into a world that had momentarily forgotten how to be kind to its smallest inhabitants. Fact 3. The Kindertransport. In a desperate and heart-wrenching effort to save lives, thousands of parents made the ultimate sacrifice of love. They placed their children on trains, handed them a small suitcase, and watched them disappear into the fog of a foreign land. These children carried small tags around their necks like luggage, with a name and a number. For many, the sight of their parents waving goodbye on a crowded platform was the last memory they would ever hold. Love, in those dark days, meant letting go so that a child might find safety in the arms of strangers. The cold iron tracks of the railways became a symbol of a bittersweet farewell, a path that led toward life but away from the only home and warmth the children had ever known. Fact 5. The Underground Schools. When the schools were turned into ruins and the books were lost to the flames, the thirst for knowledge refused to die. In damp basements and lightless shelters, teachers continued to tell ancient stories and teach lessons by the dim light of oil lamps. They used the soot on the walls as chalkboards, and children practiced their letters in the dust of the floor. These children studied mathematics and literature while the ground beneath them shook with the weight of the war above. These underground schools were silent acts of defiance against the darkness. They proved that the human mind cannot be imprisoned by walls, and that as long as a child is willing to learn, the light of knowledge will continue to burn, even in the deepest shadows. Fact 5. The Underground Schools. When the schools were turned into ruins and the books were lost to the flames, the thirst for knowledge refused to die. In damp basements and lightless shelters, teachers continued to tell ancient stories and teach lessons by the dim light of oil lamps. They used the soot on the walls as chalkboards, and children practiced their letters in the dust of the floor. These children studied mathematics and literature while the ground beneath them shook with the weight of the war above. These underground schools were silent acts of defiance against the darkness. They proved that the human mind cannot be imprisoned by walls, and that as long as a child is willing to learn, the light of knowledge will continue to burn, even in the deepest shadows. Fact 6. The letters to the front. Across the world, millions of small hands held pencils, writing letters to fathers who were far away in the cold, gray trenches of war. They didn't write about the darkness. They drew bright yellow suns, red houses with chimneys, and gardens filled with imaginary flowers. They sent a piece of their innocent world to the men who were surrounded by fire and smoke. These drawings and messy letters were often found in the pockets of fallen soldiers, kept as the very last connection to a life that was truly worth fighting for. For a soldier, a child's drawing was a shield for the soul, a reminder that somewhere, in a quiet house, a small person was waiting for the world to be right again. It was a letter from home, carrying the scent of hope. Fact 7. The hidden children. Many children spent the most precious years of their lives living in absolute silence. They were hidden behind false walls, tucked away in dark attics, or sheltered in the deep, whispering forests. They learned the impossible task of speaking only in whispers and playing games without making a single sound. Their entire world was reduced to a few square meters of wood and shadow, yet their imaginations allowed them to travel through mountains and oceans in their minds. They became masters of the inner world, finding adventures in the patterns of the wood grain or the movement of a spider. Their silence was not a lack of voice, but a powerful, quiet endurance, a way of staying alive in a world that had become far too loud and dangerous for them to be seen. Fact 8. The stowaway toys. Even in the most difficult and terrifying journeys, children stubbornly refused to leave their dolls or teddy bears behind. These toys were often the only witnesses to their old lives, the only things that still smelled like their bedroom or their mother's perfume. A headless doll, a one-eyed bear, or a wooden horse became the sacred guardians of a child's memories. In the middle of a crowded station or a cold shelter, a child would hug their toy tightly, finding a soft piece of comfort in a world that had suddenly become very hard and cold. To a child, the toy wasn't just an object, it was a friend that understood the fear, a small piece of home that they could carry in their arms while they walked toward an uncertain future. Fact 9. The orphanages of hope. In the ruins of broken cities, where the smoke never seemed to clear, brave people created secret orphanages to protect the lost and the lonely. They shared what little they had, a few potatoes, a warm blanket, or a kind word, creating a small circle of warmth in an otherwise freezing world. These places were the very first bridges back to a normal life, where a child could finally learn how to smile again without being afraid of the sky. In these rooms, the sound of a story being told was more powerful than the sound of the war outside. These caregivers were the unsung heroes who gathered the fragments of broken childhoods and tried to glue them back together with patience, kindness, and a love that asked for nothing in return. Fact 10. The message in a bottle. Some children, separated from their families by the vast and lonely sea, wrote messages of love and threw them into the cold waves. They hoped that the ocean currents would be kinder than the currents of history and carry their words to a distant shore where their parents might be waiting. These bottles were silent prayers drifting across a world that was divided by iron borders and deep oceans. They were united by the same salt water and the same human longing for connection. A child standing on a beach, watching a bottle float away, was a symbol of the eternal hope that love can never be drowned, and that eventually every message of the heart finds its way home, no matter how far the journey may be. Fact 11. The Winter of Silence. During the coldest and most bitter winters of the war, children would stay in bed for days at a time simply to keep their bodies warm. They listened to the heavy silence of a city that had run out of coal, wood, and light. There was no heat in the radiators and no fire in the hearth. In the darkness, they would tell each other long, vivid stories about warm summer afternoons, gardens filled with ripe fruit, and tables heavy with the weight of a holiday feast. Their dreams were the only source of warmth they had left in a world made of ice. These children lived in a landscape of white snow and gray shadows, where the simple dream of a warm sun was enough to keep their hearts beating for one more day. Fact 12. The Victory Gardens. Even in the smallest patches of dirt, or in wooden boxes on a high rooftop, children helped to plant small gardens. They tended to tiny green sprouts of vegetables, protecting them from the dust and the cold. Watching a small, fragile plant grow out of the gray ruins was a powerful and lasting lesson in the cycle of life. It taught them that even after the most terrible storm, life always finds a way to return to the earth. These gardens were small victories of life over destruction. For a child, seeing a flower bloom in a world of rubble was a sign that the earth had not forgotten them, and that one day the fields would be green again, and the air would be sweet with the smell of growing things. Fact 13. The Music Box Melody. In many homes, a small antique music box was the only sound of peace that remained. Its delicate tinkling melody had the power to drown out the heavy rhythmic thumping of the war outside the door. For a few brief minutes, a child could close their eyes and imagine they were in a grand ballroom or a quiet garden, far away from the long shadows of history. The music box was a mechanical memory of a gentler time, a tiny machine that produced hope with every turn of the key. It was a treasure that was guarded carefully, because in its simple tune, the children could hear the promise that beauty still existed in the world, and that the music would one day play again for everyone to hear. Fact 14. The Clothes That Grew Small. As the long years of the conflict passed, the children continued to grow, but new clothes were a luxury that did not exist. They wore coats with sleeves that were far too short and shoes that pinched their toes until they bled. They learned to patch their socks and turn their collars, making a single garment last for years. These small, outgrown clothes are a physical and heartbreaking reminder of time moving forward, even when the world seemed to be standing still in a state of constant fear. A child's growing body was a sign of life's persistence, a quiet biological clock that refused to wait for the war to end. They grew taller even in the shadows, reaching toward a future they could only imagine. Fact 15. The Chalk Drawings. Whenever the rain cleared and the pavement was dry, children would come out and draw on the gray stones with small pieces of white chalk. They drew hopscotch grids, maps of imaginary islands, and the faces of the people they missed the most. These drawings were fragile and would eventually be washed away by the next storm, but the act of creating something beautiful in a place of destruction was a profound victory of the human spirit. It showed that even in the middle of a ruin, the instinct to play and to create is stronger than the instinct to destroy. A chalk drawing on a broken street was a message to the world that life was still there, vibrant and colorful, waiting for the rain to stop forever. Fact 16. The Radio Listeners. Families would huddle together around a small, glowing radio, listening through the static and the noise for a voice from the outside world. Children would sit in total silence, watching the warm light of the radio dial, trying to understand the heavy, grown-up words about battles and borders. To a child, the radio was a magic box that brought news of liberation and the hope that the world they used to know was still out there, somewhere beyond the horizon. It was a shared moment of tension and hope, a heartbeat of information that connected their quiet living room to the global struggle for freedom. They listened for the sound of bells and the announcement of peace, praying for the day the radio would finally bring them good news. Fact 17. The first orange. For many children born during the years of the war, the world was a place of gray colors and bitter tastes. The first time they saw a piece of fruit, like a bright orange or a small square of chocolate, was long after the peace had begun. They often didn't know how to peel the fruit or what to do with this sweet treasure in their hands. That first taste of sweetness, after years of dry bread and thin soup, was the true and final signal that the bitterness of the era had finally ended. It was a moment of pure sensory joy, a reminder that the earth is a place of abundance and that the dark times were finally behind them. That single orange was more than a fruit. It was a symbol of a world restored. Fact 18. The reunions at the station. When the guns finally went silent and the war ended, the train stations of the world were filled with children waiting for a familiar face to emerge from the steam. Some were lucky enough to find their parents, leading to scenes of joy that are impossible to describe in words. Others waited on the platforms until the very last train had left and the station grew quiet and cold once again. These stations became the most emotional places in human history, places where families were reborn and where the final heavy realization of loss was felt. A child standing on a platform holding a small suitcase and looking at the horizon is an image of the longing that defined an entire generation as they searched for the pieces of their broken lives. Fact 19. The photographs in the attic. Today, in the quiet attics of old houses, many families find blurry black and white photographs of children from that era. These children look into the camera with eyes that seem far too old for their small faces, eyes that have seen things no child should ever have to witness. These photographs are not just pieces of paper, they are a direct request from the past to the future. They ask us to never forget the value of peace and to never let the light of childhood be extinguished by the shadows of grown-up conflicts again. Each photo is a story, a heartbeat frozen in time, reminding us that every child is a treasure that must be guarded with all the strength a civilization can muster. Fact 20. The unfinished game. If you walk through the ancient, rebuilt cities of Europe or Asia today, you might still find a small glass marble or a rusted toy soldier buried deep in the earth beneath a park. These are the silent remnants of a game that was suddenly and violently interrupted by history. They are the witnesses to a childhood that was paused but never truly forgotten. As you drift into sleep tonight, remember that the greatest victory of any conflict is not the capture of land, but the return of a child's laughter to the streets. The toys are still there, hidden in the soil, waiting for a world where every game can be finished in peace and every child can grow old in the sunlight. Conclusion. The music box. The wind has calmed now. The stars are watching over the safe and quiet playgrounds of today. The stories of the past have become soft whispers in the trees, a memory that we carry so that we may build a better world. As you drift into the deep embrace of sleep, feel the warmth and safety of your home. The world is quiet now, and the children of the past are finally at rest in the light. May your dreams be filled with the glow of 1,000 paper cranes and the melody of a peaceful heart. Sleep well, and let peace be your only blanket.